Alright, welcome to the Octopode Transmuter run. You can see I did not quite start recording this at the very beginning. I was getting lazy with starting my recordings, and then I found a altar to Cheibriados on Dungeon 4.2. So I'm like, wow, I found an early Chi altar. I should probably actually record this because it might go very well. So that's why we kind of picked up in the middle of Dungeon 4.2. I started out just training unarmed combat as usual. So, aside from killing a bunch of hobgoblins and kobolds, you probably didn't miss too much. So now that I have Chi, I want to be a little bit more careful, and so I'm using some sticks to snakes here on dangerous enemies like adders. See another one while I'm injured, so I'm going to back up a little bit and hopefully not get it to come after me. But once it actually does start coming after me, I just need to summon more friendly snakes to kill the hostile snake. Let's see, so this run's going to end up going fairly well. I've already finished recording this video and have to now add the sound to it, so I do know that this run will get through to Lair and beyond. The plan is to use ice form, hopefully to find ice armor or Octopode's armor, which I can never remember if I'm actually saying it correctly or not. But if you can get both that and ice form, then you'll have decent armor. Unfortunately, ice form by itself does not give very much armor. I think it's usually around 5 or 6 when you start casting it. You can raise the spell power to get it higher up, but it won't go too high up. I'm not entirely sure what the max is. I think the max is somewhere around 12. But things go pretty smoothly here with constriction in the early game, as long as you keep in mind that you only have 1 AC. Early game shouldn't be too bad. Just, avoid anything that can hurt you. Simple, really. My unarmed's up to 6 now. I think I do end up moving out and training, I think dodging next, because especially with Beastly Appendage giving you a tentacle spike every time, and constriction, you don't necessarily need to go all the way up to like 10 unarmed on an octopode. You can stop a little bit sooner. Also, you have sticks to snakes to fall back on whenever you need real power. Yes, there we go. I turned on dodging to try and get a little bit more defenses, because octopodes are very fragile. Keep pulling things slowly, so I managed to get the worm separate from the adder and the giant cockroach, which is great because the 3 of them together at this point would be a very dangerous fight, but breaking it up into 2 fights is pretty safe. Mostly just the worm is strong physical damage and decent health and dangerous to fight without running away from it and taking advantage of how slow it is. And then the adder is fast and poisonous, and you don't want both of those threats at the same time. You can't kite back a worm if there's an adder who's faster than you and hitting you with poison. So I think I put my first point into dexterity, and then I'm putting the next one into intelligence. Basically, I'm just going to end up splitting between int and dex. It's a little bit less important where you put your stat points when you have Chi, because all of your stats are going to be ridiculously high. There's diminishing returns on dexterity and evasion. There's also sort of, it becomes somewhat less important to have really high intelligence when you can already cast all your spells just fine. But it does not hurt to have more intelligence. You will keep getting more spell power. Spell power also has step downs, but your other option is to go with strength, which does not have step downs, but it's mostly used to wear heavier armor, and octopodes will never wear armor, so all it's going to do is increase your melee damage by about 3 or 4% a point. And while that will keep giving you 3 to 4% each level, it's, at some points you just don't really need that much damage. So I think I end up splitting it mostly between int and dex this run. I'm going to be avoiding that ghost because ogre berserkers will probably two-shot you pretty reliably at this point. Both ghosts of ogre berserkers and actual ogre monsters are things that you want to stay as far away from as possible. The ghost is probably a little too strong to bring down with sticks to snakes, but if there was a regular ogre, sticks to snakes would be an excellent idea. I think I do end up dragging this guy all the way back and running away from him. He's just really not something that I can kill at this point. You can see I took 14 damage just going down the stairs. Early rings of protection like this are basically a godsend, and to find a +6 ring of protection on D4, I'm very glad that I was recording this because now this octopode is like twice as strong as he used to be. Now that I have some actual armor, I still have no guaranteed damage reduction, which is a secondary property of armor, but in this case it's a secondary property of actual body armor and not rings of protection. It's usually not that important, but all it really does is prevent you from taking the worst possible damage from a powerful melee hit, and doesn't reduce the average damage you take quite as much. I mean, it has some effect, but not a tremendous effect. So it just means that if you're playing like an octopode or a felid and you're not in statue form or something else that gives you GDR, then you'll probably take a little bit higher max damage. Your average damage will be pretty similar though. So here's Blork the Orc. So I want to deal with him in open territory with as many snakes as I can possibly get. Since I took a fairly decent hit there, I want to be close to the stairs in case it all goes wrong and I need to back up and get up the stairs. So I'm hugging close to the stairs, trying to get enough snakes between us to kill him, but I don't think it's going to work. I'm out of mana, and so I'm probably going to go up the stairs here, rest, get all my mana back, give it another shot with more minions. And this is probably your go-to strategy in the early game. You want as many summoned allies as you can to help you get through monsters like this that I could not kill. I was hoping there to get him next to the stairs, but he's not positioning himself next to the stairs for me to fight in a straight up fight, so I do end up summoning a bunch of help. I think I do end up also joining them in melee, which is a little bit risky, but usually you can get away with it. I'm starting to get some dodging, so my EV has now budged up to 13. You probably could use spider form. I tend to be a little bit of a cat fight behind me. I tend to be a little bit of a single-minded focus where, if I'm going to go ice form, I use ice form. It's not necessarily the best way to do that. So I probably could work in some spider form here, but I don't think I end up using it. So I don't really want to fight Doan, especially not close to where Devessa is. So I'm backing him up. I think I do end up getting him into melee and just taking him out pretty quickly. Yeah, so he goes down pretty fast. That's going to mean that now when I wake up his sister, she's going to berserk and chase after me. She can only do this once though, so it's kind of nice to bring her into line of sight, make her berserk, and then run away from her. She will lose the berserk, and then you don't have to worry about dealing with her berserk later on. I did, of course, also wake up the orc pack that was to the left of me, but I'm on a whole other floor and not worrying about it anymore. So here I do just directly engage an ogre, which, as I said, you probably really want to be using sticks to snakes. Even with the tentacle spike, it's really not that safe. I took 2 good hits. Another max hit would probably have killed me, but you do kill ogres pretty fast. My offenses are pretty fast, so you can usually bring them down pretty quick. It's just that same goes for them on you. So here I have a bunch of gnolls that have powerful pole arms, which is not something I want to be directly engaging in. Fortunately, there's a pretty strong choke point there, and they come at you from the corner, so I didn't have as much trouble with reaching as I could have. But this is another dangerous situation, and one where I took a larger number of smaller hits compared to the ogre, so that ring of protection is really working very well for me. It probably did quite a lot of damage reduction over the course of that entire fight. Menkier here has Torment, one of the only monsters in the early game that has Torment, kind of like a introduction to the mechanic. Usually you don't have that much health this early on, so it's not that big of a problem. But his melee attack is also pretty strong. I think he does about 30 max damage, so he's basically like an ogre who can hit very hard. And you don't want to be stuck next to him after you have him down to half health. So I ended up having to use, I think, 3 potions of heal wounds just to power through that. I really should have been further away and using sticks to snakes, that sort of thing. But since I was right next to him and in a bad spot, I did end up just chugging consumables in order to live. So that centaur is kind of near the stairs. I'm trying to wake him up, bring him over to the stairs, and try and get him next to me in melee. I could use Temporal Distortion since I now have it and 3 piety, 3 stars piety, so I now have that ability. But I haven't trained invocations yet, and I don't want to spend piety as I'm still trying to build it up. When I have an alternative option like good stairs, I'll just take good stairs. Unfortunately, I didn't fully clear the 3rd floor, and so now I have to deal with the wandering monsters that are coming into line of sight. The Phantom wasn't too bad, but I really don't want to fight a unique, even if she doesn't have Berserk anymore. Fortunately, in this case, there's enough open space and enough time that I was able to just spam the hell out of snakes and let the snakes take care of them for me, which really is going to be your most important survival strategy. Because of this, tight corridors and small spaces can actually work against you a little bit depending on the encounter. So here I'm going to summon a bunch of snakes and just try and get him to come closer to me. And now that he's, 1 space away from me, I can step in and only fight melee attacks, which are much less dangerous than his shot arrows. And this one was close enough that I could take a step in towards him as well. That's going to give me enough arrows that I can, freely use stick to snakes whenever I need to. I've been training transmutations and ice magic this time, so my ice form is just about ready to cast. I'm gonna, I think, train it a little bit more, but I think it was 14%, which, yes, okay, 17%, which is castable. I can certainly start using it now if I need to. There's some chance that it will backfire, but the benefit's probably worth that risk at this point. Goliath beetles hit for like 30, I think it's 30 damage. Very powerful, very slow. You can actually outrun them even with chi, but I had enough allies with me and I thought, I could use ice form, get a massive 12 armor, which 12 armor is pretty good at this point, but still probably not that safe to fight them. It did end up getting me below half health and doing a good bit of damage. So never underestimate really slow monsters. If you're going to fight them in melee, then the fact that they're really slow doesn't really matter that much anymore. You've given up your speed advantage by standing next to them. They won't attack you as often, but when they hit that hard, they still hit that hard. So, Orc Priest is still not something I want to walk towards, especially when there's possibly another Orc Priest, there's possibly Orc Wizards with them. The Hound there is pretty strong, so I'm backing up into a corner and trying to take them on one at a time. It's a little bit tricky because that Centaur showed up and did a good amount of damage, but fortunately this little choke point here is pretty close to ideal. Like, you can back around in any direction and really restrict how many things can see you. Probably if I hadn't had that favorable terrain, that could have been a death right there. Just, if I found all those monsters in open territory, I mean, probably your best bet then would be try and teleport and escape, since I've explored most of this floor. So yeah, choke points are your best and worst feature in the dungeon. Almost always best, but in some narrow cases, like if you're spamming Call Imp or Sticks to Snakes, then in those particular cases, choke points can work against you. But terrain is probably one of the most important things in Dungeon Crawl. So now I have Ice Form, and I'm going to be using it for just about every fight. The one downside is going to be I'm going to be fire vulnerable. The only things this early on that are likely to be casting fire spells would be orc wizards, and they can also cast ice spells, and their fire spells are also resisted by armor. So it's kind of still alright to use Ice Form. If they do cast a fire spell, you'll take a little bit more damage. Your armor will help reduce it somewhat, and the extra hit points in Ice Form will help give you a little bit more of a buffer. But it would be fine to not use Ice Form against orc wizards, but just about everything else I'm going to use Ice Form for. I want to try and split these knolls up as much as possible. It's a little bit trickier because I can't drag them too far back, about 6 tiles back or so. There's that much tighter choke point that's a lot better, but I don't want to walk them back that far if they're going to be stabbing me with spears. So I do end up, unfortunately, having to fight most of the pack at the same time, which, as you can see, is quite risky. I'm really too low on health, and a potion of curing is not a good way to heal in front of 3 monsters. With the AC and EV that I have, I was able to get away with it, but that's certainly a fight that was poorly handled. Most of these monsters now are becoming fairly simple. Centaurs and adders are no longer as dangerous as they used to be. Having 13 AC is going a long way towards that. It does hurt my EV a little bit. I'm not entirely sure what it is about Ice Form that lowers your EV slightly, but it's not a huge loss, just losing about 3 points or so. That's the second time we killed Natasha. I think I don't end up actually finding her a third time. I'm just gonna go down. Despite having played this a couple days ago, I still remember a fair amount of the details. Yeah, I did end up looking around for her. I don't think I ever actually found her. I just give up and go down. But yeah, what I'm doing now is I'm looking for her third spawn so that I can go and finally put her spirits to rest. And she seems to be hiding somewhere. Nowhere to be found. Oh, okay, well, there's I was wrong. I did in fact find her eventually. I was determined enough, and there goes all my claims about remembering what I actually did this run. I'm apparently lying to all of you. Still haven't found any good rings since the ring of +6 protection, so at this point I'm starting to get a little bit low on rings compared to what I would expect. But once you find a +6 ring of protection, you really don't have any room to complain ever again. So even if that's the only ring you have, you're still way ahead of everything. More gnolls with halberds, which are getting less scary at this point. 13 AC is enough to take out a decent chunk of a null's damage, even when they have a decent weapon. Of course, it can always fail. Just picked up my first heal wounds potion after quaffing the entire stack against Menkiera, so it's good to always have at least one lying around. That error message there is one thing that comes up quite a lot. I keep trying to use wands while in ice form, which unfortunately does not work. You're going to be mostly restricted to just punching things when you're in ice form. Obviously, potions and scrolls are still okay, but no wands, no rods. I would say at this point it's beginning to shape up like a one game. The concept that people often talk about, how once you're familiar with the game you have a couple wins. Getting to the Lair is almost equivalent to winning the game. Once I have 13 armor on an Octopode, I've got nearly max piety with my god. It's shaping up to be fairly secure at this point. I really don't want to fight that Tenku Conjurer who's been placed by this vault. It is somewhat out of depth at this point. I'm trying to avoid him. It doesn't always go so well when you try to avoid monsters. They can wander out and come after you anyway, but at least for a little while I'd like to avoid it. But as we can see, it does not go so well, so I'm going to take one step further southeast so that I'm out of line of sight until I force it to have to come, right up next to me. I have to actually duck one more down because it doesn't follow me tightly around corners. Ranged monsters will try and have as much room between you when they go around corners. They'll duck around a corner from a distance rather than coming straight up to you like a melee monster does. So I had to take another step down to really force him to get close to me. Fortunately, there was plenty of choke points that I can use to force him to come all the way into range with me. The force lance they used to knock me back was the one tricky part. I did end up, taking a step closer to him and sacrificing all of that time, taking the 2 turns to step towards him. But it worked out just fine. So from now on, it's basically just going to be ice form everything. If there's something really tricky, you could still, of course, use sticks to snakes, but that's going to soon start to drop off in power. I don't have, snakes will not take care of everything all game long, so it's becoming a little bit less useful. Still, always a good idea to cast it if you need a little extra power and the monster's far enough away from you that it's not going to get any deal any damage to you. So I just found Regeneration. That's a very handy early game amulet and can be used throughout the entire game. I'm a big fan of Regeneration, as I've probably repeated many times by now. Random effects wands are not supported by Cheibriados because there's a chance that you might get haste, and so you can usually use it safely, but there's a chance that you'll get penance, and so I just usually don't bother with them. You could take the chance if you really want to, but I don't recommend it. So I found a nice stack of javelins of penetration there. That's always handy. Just always a good ranged weapon to have. You don't need to have very much throwing in order to benefit from it. Even just like, even 0 or, just put in like 3 or 5 points into throwing and they'll do pretty decent damage. And here's another turning point where I go from pretty good game to wow, that's an amazing ring. So from top to bottom, positive energy is not super great. The Ring of Lam is pretty awesome. It's plus 40V with an extra resistance. I'm not going to need that resistance because the final ring, which is Syogi, the Arpoise, double protection from fire and plus 7 int and C and Biz. That's going to be the main ring I want. I want that one, the EV for poison, the wizardry and fire resistance, and because I just don't have any rings of protection from cold, I'll also take a ring from protection from cold. Even though it's somewhat redundant with ice form, I'm probably not going to use ice form all game long, so it would be nice to have some cold resistance when I'm not in ice form. So yeah, that shot made me very happy, and although I don't have enough gold to buy the rings just yet, I think I'm actually going to end up ducking into Orc Mines pretty early just to gather gold and start buying some of the amazing rings in that shop. You know, the Orcish Mine's always a reliable source of gold. And usually some decent weapon and armor selection, but I don't need either of those. So, just the gold from this particular character. Backing up and letting the ogre come towards us. Two-headed ogres still strong enough that if they got really good rolls, you know, from both attacks, it would be a problem. It's increasingly unlikely, but still possible. You're more likely to get one bad roll than two bad rolls, so you know, to have to get two at on the same turn is increasingly unlikely. So this has blink and repel missiles, which are phenomenal utility spells that are useful, you know, to just about anyone. So now, as my evasion starts to go up, I'm up to 16 now in ice form. I can also repel missiles, and so things like archers and spellcasters are becoming less and less threatening. I believe that ice form does give you some GDR, although it's not very much. So, you know, I'm pretty well covered from both melee and ranged at this point. Let's see, what's the GDR on ice form? Doesn't seem to have any. I could be wrong about that. In any case, GDR is not the most important thing, so I don't really want to overemphasize it. Not the most important thing you'll ever find. So this looks like it's the entrance to the Orc Mines. Some of the Orc warriors here with pole arms are a little bit dangerous because approaching them can be, you know, free hits that you don't want to take. But overall, the swarm goes down relatively easily. Against that many orcs, I wouldn't say that my defenses are particularly high. You know, 13, 16 is just kind of decent, but they're not bad, and they're usually quite bad when you're an octopode. So for an octopode, they're good. Just overall, they're about average. Again, these wizards could cast fire spells, but they also can cast cold spells, so it's kind of a wash, and it's going to be alright to fight them in ice form. Once I go back up and buy that ring that has the double protection from fire, then of course ice form will resist fire, which will make it, you know, perfect for anything, really. There's an armor shop, which will be much less useful to me than a ring shop, but you can still find a buckler. You know, bucklers or a hat could still be potentially useful. Obviously I can't use a shield while I'm in ice form, but like I said, I'm probably not going to be using ice form all game long. Hopefully if we find statue form or something like that, we can use shields. Oh, that's another ice beast. Ice beast party. take a nasty hit there when I'm switching into ice form. Also, I just lose a quarter of my life, but you know. Still, at this depth, I only have 65 hit points when not in ice form, so not too secure just yet. I should probably train more fighting soon. Octopodes have 10% less health than normal, so even if you do train fighting, they're never going to have all that much hit points, but it's not terrible. And ice form, statue form, hydra form, and dragon form all add hit points, so that will certainly help to make up for it. Pretty much the only thing that doesn't is spider form and blade hands. Getting some benefit out of my repel missiles there, up against a pack of centaurs. This pack was particularly tough. Skeletal warriors are very strong and are basically out of depth at this point. I do a teleport. I think I use a heal wounds. Take a step back on my slow movement speed. That will make it easier to trigger the teleport. And then I'm going to try and shout because I want to drag the skeleton away from the skeletal warriors. Try and reduce that monster pack as much as possible, but frankly it's just too much for me to take on right now, so I go back up and go to the Orcish Mines. Again, normally you would just do Lair first, but I'm looking for gold in this particular case because of that exceptional ring shop. So I want to find a ring. Enough gold to buy the ring, rather. I think I had a teleport then. I wasn't sure what it cost me to teleport. I think one of the orcs ended up having a distortion weapon that I kind of was playing too quickly and didn't notice, which is dangerous. Yeah, there it is. There's the flail of distortion, so I had a teleport effect put on me. It's fortunately not banished, which at this point would probably be very dangerous. I've got the Amulet of Regeneration. Chisel is down in the abyss, and I can maybe wander around until I find an exit and do a lot of teleporting to try and avoid being swarmed. But yeah, the abyss would definitely be high risk. I'm not strong enough to survive the abyss comfortably. Fortunately, I was never sent there, so looking over the prices of the rings and which one I want to get first, I think I do end up going with the double resist fire ring because it's clearly the best ring there. I mean, the double resist fire by itself is worth the price. You add on the +7 int and resist poison, and it's just incredible ring. Also has sea invisibility, just so I don't have to worry about carrying a ring of sea invisibility. Saves the slot. Couple more rings like that one and you'll just resist everything and be awesome, which is basically the goal of the character. Octopodes are a little bit weak in the beginning, but once you find enough decent rings, they can become one of the strongest races, I think. They have a high potential. It's just, the hardest thing in Dungeon Crawl is the early game, and so making the early game harder in exchange for the late game is usually a bad trade-off. But people like me, the min-maxers, the dreamers out there, like to think about the end game, even if it's not necessarily the most important part of the game. But, So that was a reasonably dangerous fight. I had taken about 30 points of damage, and there was still a lot of melee orcs next to me. One with a polearm and 2 priests, so I just popped a slouch on them, which will instantly kill the priests. Most of the little orcs. The orc warrior with the polearm is still there, but I can go up the steps and rest and come back down and take him by himself. You know, whenever you start to get swarmed by too many things, don't forget that a single slouch will take care of plain orcs, including, you know, the wizards and the priests. Just won't kill the warriors, the knights, the warlords, or anything with high priest or similar. Things with few hit points die instantly, and it's really a lifesaver. Once you're up at 6-star piety, especially if you've had 6-star piety for like the past 2 or 3 fights, you've got enough piety to do a couple of slouches without really killing your piety much. Like you won't lose abilities. It takes, I think, 4 or 5 to go down to 5 stars. So it's something you should use fairly often. Perhaps be a little bit more conservative with it if you're not at the 6-star piety to begin with. I swear my next game, you know, if I end up doing a 3rd one of these, I will not use Cheibriados. I'll pick some other god. But I can't help it. You know, Chi is just the one true god. Not Nick Cage, it's Cheibriados. Nick Cage never slouched 30 orcs for me, you know? What has he done for you? So at this point I have enough gold to go and pick up the ring. I believe that that's going to be about it. I think, yeah, go up and I get the ring, and then I'm going to continue the rest in part 2. So yeah, dipping into Orc early is a little bit safer with Chi because you can slouch down giant packs. And then gold is yours, the ring is mine, and that is an incredible, incredible ring. Frees up the See Invisible slot, makes it much easier to cast spells. Speaking of which, I'll start training for repel missiles, get a little bit of spell power under that. I think I do, yeah. I still haven't actually found the Lair entrance yet, but since that spawns between floor 8 and 11, it has to be on floor 11, so I can just wander around 11 until I find it. Cyclops does some pretty heavy damage, and there's still that pack of skeletal warriors on this floor, so this floor is pretty dangerous. Having the Lair on D11 does increase the risk considerably. You know, usually you would not want to be on this floor until you're level 14 or so. Fortunately, between the Ice Form Ring of Protection and now that Artifact Ring, I'm quite strong, and so it won't be too bad. Protection from magic, that's my first magic resistance that I've found, so that will be very helpful. Even as strong as I am, though, those skeleton warriors are still too strong for me to fight safely. I believe I end up trying to do a whole bunch of teleporting away and stuff like that. I have to make 2 passes at them. They're quite nasty. Jessica at this point is absolutely non-threatening. I'm kind of surprised that she can even spawn on D11. She also spawns on like D2. there's the lair. If I was being smart, I would probably just go straight down to the lair immediately, but I kind of tend to like to complete levels, which as you can see put me into trouble here. I mean, it's only one more orc warrior, skeletal warrior, but being at 24 health is not a good thing. Put another point into dexterity. And now I'm finding that the lair staircase was not as clear as I thought it was. I was hoping to duck down into the lair and regenerate, but there were, just a lot of things nearby. Or rather, just, hug by the stairs and regenerate in case the, skeletons came back. I wouldn't have actually gone down the stairs except if there were orc warriors there. It's probably a better way to say it, so I had to duck down to regenerate. Which can be risky if the lair entrance is also swarmed with monsters.